This video is made possible by Practical Defense Systems, the best online security training at the lowest prices. You can start your security career today online at pdsclasses.com. Check them out.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. It's time for the GunGuyTV podcast.
Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV and of this podcast. If it weren't for you, this podcast would end, GunGuyTV would end, and I wouldn't be able to get the message out that is to promote and secure and protect and expand the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans. In this podcast, I'd like to talk about some positive stuff a little bit first, if you don't mind. And so I'm going to address that some. I do want to remind you, and certainly if this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, let you know that the podcast is 1 hour long, the first half of which is free, and you can listen to it on your favorite podcast player. We also post a video version on YouTube and all of the other video platforms, including places like BitChute, which I always have to say carefully, GunStreamer, the Utah Gun Exchange, Vimeo, Facebook, and a host of other places. So you'll be able to find the podcast all over the place. The video version is actually just an audio podcast. It just has a video there of a thumbnail. So we make a thumbnail for it so that it has an image to go along with it, and we post it on the video places because, frankly, a lot of people like to consume it there. Other folks listen to it in their car on the way to work or whatever. So you can check it out in either place. All right, on to some of the things that I wanted to talk about. And again, I want to get positive here a little bit. Obviously, if you've watched the news, you know that very recently in the state of California, we had a victory. And by the way, that victory doesn't just affect the state of California. It affects all of the states that fall under the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we have until the 28th before the law actually, hopefully, will go into effect shortly thereafterwards. But my understanding is that the state of California has the opportunity to ask for an en banc appeal or en banc review of the decision in the Ninth Circuit, or to go directly to the Supreme Court and ask them to review it. And even if they don't, any judge on the Ninth Circuit can ask for an en banc review, but they have to do it. My understanding is they have to do it by the 28th, or they have to ask for an extension and get it approved before the 28th. So we get to the 29th and nobody's done that. Then that ruling goes back to Judge Benitez here in San Diego, California. And Judge Benitez then can remove his temporary stay on his decision, and the law declaring the magazine ban that is in California unconstitutional becomes the law of the land, and it affects all of the states in the Ninth Circuit, which means that we could go back to actually buying regular normal mags instead of the neutered ones that we have to get stuck with now. So that's very good news. Is it final yet? No, but it's very good news. And I want to encourage you with that news. I realize there's always chicken littles. I call them chicken littles. They're the people that will always find something wrong with everything. Well, yeah, but you got that victory, but you haven't dealt with this one yet. You haven't dealt with that one yet. And I still can't do this. And I still can't. Look, you know what? Calm down, Chicken Little. The sky is not falling. We're winning a little step at a time. And with each victory, we should encourage one another. Like my Bible says, encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today. All right, another piece of great news, since I'm talking about good news here, just to try to encourage you at the outset. In Breitbart, I saw Trump administration makes additional 2.3 million acres available for hunting and fishing. Now, among the things I love to do are hunt and fish and just enjoy the outdoors in general. I love to camp and do those kind of things. So when the government starts locking up more and more acreage and says you can't camp here, you can't hunt here, you can't fish here, I feel like my tax dollars are wasted, because all this land that could be available for people to enjoy the outdoor sports is no longer there, and you're forbidden from enjoying that land. And that, truthfully, I'm not trying to pick on, one side or the other, but the truth is that these socialist, super progressive Democrats at the moment, which is where the Democratic Party is going, wants to lock up all of the land and essentially have you and I not be able to do anything on it. And I want to be able to do things on it, so I'm very grateful for the Trump administration doing what they do. The story in Breitbart says Fox News reported, I love it, Breitbart is telling us what Fox News reported, but nevertheless, Fox News reported that the newly available acreage is being touted as the largest historical expansion of its kind It represents the single largest expansion of hunting and fishing opportunities to occur throughout the history of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The new access opens up hunting and fishing opportunities at 138 national wildlife refuges and 9 national fish hatcheries. That's stinking cool. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was great news. There are some really interesting and good things happening. Obviously, if you watch the mainstream news or you just look at the news every day, you're going to get depressed after a while. I mean, for crying out loud, you got to watch something positive once in a while, otherwise you'll go nuts. So while I am going to talk about the election a little bit and some interesting things that I've seen sort of in the back alley news, if you want to call it that doesn't come out in front of your face, I at least wanted to start off with some positive things that are happening. Now, I've got to tell you, I was saying to my wife the other day that I'm going to be so glad when the election is over and I can stop focusing so much of my attention on dealing with emergencies. It seems like everything lately has been an emergency of some sort or the threat of an emergency of some sort. Obviously, there's the Chinese COVID-19 virus thing that everybody's been dealing with. And of course, in California, much of California is still limited on what we can and cannot do and experiencing partial shutdowns where other parts of the country perhaps are not. And then, of course, you've got the racial violence and the civil unrest going on. Not so much where I live. We live in San Diego County, California, so we don't have that going on here. But it is going on in other parts of the country. And then you have threats that it will be even worse and that kind of stuff. So if you're going to be a good provider for your family or at least a wise individual, you have to give some thought to the fact that that might show up where you live. And you've got to take some steps to prepare for it. Or prepare to leave if you got to do that. So then you got those to deal with. And if you weren't ready, now you got to get ready. Well, that's time, money, focus, exercise, and all that other stuff. And then, of course, in California, we have the rolling blackouts because the liberal, democratic, progressive leaders of this state over a period of decades have so crippled the power grid in this state by virtue of their Green New Deal thinking that we don't generate enough power to pay for our own way or to take care of our own needs. We keep having to buy power from other states. So the mindset there is that, gee, we don't want to have nuclear power. We don't want to have power generated by fossil fuels. We don't want to do any of that because we're California and we're saving the planet. So what we will do is we'll put up all kinds of windmills and solar, even though it won't do the job and it doesn't produce enough power. And then when we don't have enough power, we'll buy power from other states who are generating it with nuclear power and fossil fuels and all the things we hate. But by virtue of the fact that we didn't do it, they're doing it, we feel so much better and we're just so much more empowered than they. That's the mindset in this goofy state. So as a result, we have rolling blackouts. We had our power go out over the weekend. And I have several friends whose power has gone out more than once. So you kind of have to prepare for that and get ready for that emergency. So I've spent a lot of time, and frankly, we've spent quite a bit of money getting ready for these multiple emergency possibilities that have been coming up ever since the beginning of the year when they discovered that folks were starting to get sick and they couldn't figure out why. And they discovered that all this stuff started, at least the virus anyway, in China. And the rest of it, I think, is just trying to keep Trump from getting elected and the unfortunate natural consequences of crazy, whack job, loony leftist rule in the state in which I live. Now, in amongst all of that, the good news is that we've still had time to prepare. It hasn't caught us totally off guard. We haven't had social unrest in our neighborhood. We haven't had people dropping like flies. It's not like the COVID virus is like Ebola or something. And certainly we haven't had the kind of economic crash that people were predicting as a result of all this. And I would give credit there to President Donald J. Trump for keeping the economy from crashing. Certainly it isn't the result of the wisdom and power of the intellect and experience of Governor Gruesome Nuisance. If anything, he's done more harm than good. But all things equal, we're still working, our bills are still getting paid, and we still have a nice place to live. We love our neighbors, and we've had the time, at least in the Persinger household, to get prepared for some of these other possible emergencies. So all in all, I still look outside. The sun is still shining. The world is still spinning. My family is still my family. My neighbors are still great people. The country, by and large, there are 327 million people roughly in this country, and the majority of the country is actually running pretty well. And the majority of the country is not experiencing civil unrest. And the majority of the people in the country, the 327 million of us, are not dying of COVID-19. And a lot of us are still working, still paying our bills. So the world is not coming apart at the seams, even though the mainstream media and certainly the Democratic National Committee convention would like to convince you that it is. So I wanted to start off this podcast by telling you that things are not as dark as they seem. There are lots of problems in the world, but you know what? It's not as bad as it first seems. And if you're a Christian, I would remind you that Jesus told us we would face troubles in this world, but that we should take heart. He has overcome the world. So it's not nearly as terrible as the mainstream media would like you to focus on, and I urge you not to focus on that. Yeah, you got to know what's going on, but focus on the good things, focus on the great things that are going on in your life, and you'll be a much happier person. Now, we'll get on to the rest of the podcast in just a minute. As part of the preparation I was just talking about, I took a hard look at my self-defense insurance coverage, if you want to call it that, or CCW insurance or whatever. For many years, I've used Second Call Defense because I like the folks there. They always seemed like they'd have my back. And I still do like them, and I still recommend that service. The problem is that the level of coverage does not rise to what I need, what my family and I need. We have a business, we have some rental properties, we have our home. So we have a lot to lose, and I'm in my 60s. I mean, my wife and I are not getting younger. At some point, we'd like to retire and still own a home and still have some things we've fought for and scraped for and saved for our whole lives. We don't want them taken away, because one day we have to defend ourselves and then somebody sues us or the government prosecutes us or whatever. I remind you that I am in the People's Socialist Republic of California. So I started looking for more coverage and a more robust company. And what I found was CCW Safe. Now, I've looked at all of them and I explored all of them. So if you have a favorite, that's fine. But I'm letting you know that of all of them, the best I could find was CCW Safe because they provide unlimited coverage for both civil and criminal people suing you or you being prosecuted. Unlimited coverage. I could not find anybody else who does that. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that even with some of these insurance companies, if they provide $1 million, for example, for a civil settlement, and they say, well, if we get sued, we'll pay a settlement up to $1 million. Well, that depends on how they're structured. Many of them, if it costs them $500,000 to fight for that case in court, that only leaves you $500,000 left of that $1 million to pay any settlement because they're using the settlement money to pay the court fees. CCW Safe does not do that. Those are two separate things. So if you have that coverage for a settlement in court, then that coverage is that coverage. If you end up losing in a civil action and you end up owing a certain amount of money, that coverage is what it is. It doesn't shrink because CCW Safe fought for you in court. Here's the other thing. CCW Safe can tell you and will tell you about specific cases they have fought and won. I couldn't get the other companies to do that. They were all pretty vague about it. I spent about an hour with them on the phone. I want to encourage you, if you are like me and you need serious coverage for this stuff so that you don't end up standing on your porch chasing off Antifa and getting prosecuted or sued and losing everything, check out CCW Safe. I will put a link in the description if there's one available where you're listening to the podcast, or you can go to our website at GunGuy.tv and click on the CCW Safe banner.
The opinions expressed by the GunGuy are always right, unless they're wrong.
Now back to what we were talking about, and that was certainly lots of good stuff going on, but then also the fact that I've spent a lot of time preparing for the possibility of new emergencies coming up, one of which was foreshadowed in a tweet by Andy No. Now, you may never have heard of Andy No. He spells his last name Ngo. Andy No is an independent journalist, and he is in Portland, Oregon, as far as I know, and he's been following the Portland protests and reporting on Antifa specifically for quite some time. In fact, he's taken a good beating from them in one instance and was hospitalized, and he's threatened by them on a regular basis. So I watch his Twitter feed because I want to keep abreast of what's happening. You really don't get the news by watching the news anymore. You have to watch these independent journalists if you really want to know what's happening. He recently posted the following: if Donald Trump wins re-election in November, Americans will experience a wave of mass left-wing violence, rioting, and looting much worse than what we've already experienced so far. Now, that's a quote from his tweet, and I've given that a lot of thought. So I thought I would share with you my thinking on that. Certainly, if you are wise, I think it's wise to prepare for the fact that that might be true, and it could come to a neighborhood near you. So you're smart if you are well armed and perhaps prepared to bolt out of there. If it gets too dangerous to stay, then you need to be able to go, and you got to have a place to go. Otherwise, you're just a refugee or a homeless person. But at the same time, you might stay. And if you stay, well, this stuff might cause you to have to defend yourself or your family or your home. It may be an interruption in services, police services most notably, but also things like water and electricity and that kind of stuff. And just like any other natural emergency that isn't caused by rioting, sometimes it can interrupt those services. So it's a good idea for you to be aware of that. And it might be a good idea for you to talk with your neighbors about this stuff. I've actually had a conversation with a few of my neighbors about this, and each and every one of them has expressed the desire to protect the neighborhood. Now, I live in an area where that's sort of the norm. We've had blackouts here before, and everybody kind of comes together to keep the neighborhood safe. But that's not the case everywhere, and I realize that. It might not be a bad idea for you to have a chat with your neighbors. Now, if you're in the People's Socialist Republic of California or a state that is of that ilk, you want to be careful about what you talk about, because we do have the red flag laws and all that kind of stuff. If you end up talking to a Karen or some soy boy or whatever, it's possible that they might end up calling the police and saying that you scared them because you were talking about violence and this and that and the other thing. And the next thing you know, there is always the remote possibility that your local constabulary will be knocking on your door to serve you with some sort of search warrant or to come and talk with you about your threatening manner or your craziness or whatever. So I would urge you to be a little careful about what you talk about with your neighbors, but if your neighbors are open to that and you know it, wouldn't be a bad conversation to have. Likewise, I would say, if you haven't planned an exit, you might want to do that. If you live in a city, you might want to figure a way to get out into the country. And maybe that's because you have a friend or because you have family or something that has a property out there and you can move out there with them temporarily. Or perhaps you're fortunate enough to have a second home or a lot of camping equipment or an RV or something, and you can bust out and disappear. I would encourage you to investigate those possibilities with this in mind, and that is that you are not going to be the only one. Now, why do I say that? Because I'm telling you that you should do this because I've already done it. In the last, I would say since the beginning of the COVID thing, when that first hit, a buddy of mine, I just traded emails with him yesterday on something else, but a buddy of mine who has for the last 3 or 4 years been working to build a home in Utah for he and his wife to retire. By the way, they finished it, I think, last year, and it's a beautiful home. They love to fly fish, so it's right by a river, and they've got land and all these other things, and they really took many years to acquire the right land and have the house built, and they did all this stuff because they're getting ready to retire. A little bit older than me. And for them, it's time. They wanted to get out of California and live in a quieter place. Well, he called me right before Governor Gruesome Nuisance or Gavin Nuisance or whatever you want to call him had put in his order to shut down the economy, essentially. He called me right after that. In fact, it was the day of that order, and asked me how things were going at the house. And I said, "You're in Utah, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I think I may have told you this story before. But in any case, he and his wife packed up and off they went. Now, they don't have any kids. Never had any children, so they didn't have any kids to worry about. And, of course, they're in my age bracket, so parents are gone in their case. And off they went into Utah. Now, they're still there. All this time they've been in Utah. But what that told me was, suddenly I woke up, I hung up the phone, and you hang up the phone, and I thought to myself, holy smoke, we have no place to go. That didn't really dawn on me. We have a very old, kind of dilapidated RV, which we're going to get rid of, but it's not roadworthy, so that's not going to help us any. And so and where would we go anyway? We don't own any land anywhere. We do have rental properties, but those have renters in them. I mean, we have one, for example, out in the city of El Centro. Well, the folks that live there. We can't go along and say, hey, by the way, get out, we're moving in, So where are we going to go? We didn't know. So we decided to come up with a solution, and I'll tell you more about what we did in just a minute. While I may have said many times that I don't make a living from GunGuyTV, I still cost money to produce this stuff, and I still could use your support. So one way you can support GunGuyTV, this podcast, and the video channel is by shopping using our Amazon link. It costs you absolutely nothing. All you have to do is go to our website at GunGuy.tv and look for the Amazon banner, the little rectangular banner on the top of the website. If you click on that banner, it will take you to Amazon. And then bookmark that Amazon page. If you start your shopping from that bookmarked Amazon page every time, then no matter what you buy, whether it's firearms related or hunting related or whatever, or not, it could be toothpaste or toilet paper or furniture or whatever, anything that you buy, if you do that, we get a little marketing fee for. It doesn't cost you anything. So there's a way for you to support GunGuyTV absolutely for free. Just use our Amazon link when you're shopping Amazon.
Saving the Second Amendment, one episode at a time. This is the GunGuyTV podcast.
One of the first things that we started looking at was the possibility of replacing the RV we have with a new one, or I should say one that's new to us. We probably would buy a used one rather than a new one, but that just didn't pan out. Part of it was money and part of it was there were other things, but we just ended up not doing that. Instead, we thought, well, what can we do that we would use anyway, but would also position us to be able to escape if we needed to escape? And what we decided to do was buy a really high-quality cabin tent. And we were going to buy, I looked at wall tents and other things, but I wanted something with a floor because I want my wife to be comfortable. I want in particular, my wife. I'm pretty easygoing where that's concerned. I've camped and hunted all of my life, and so I really don't mind some of this stuff. But for her, I wanted it to be more like a home than anything else. So we ended up buying a Kodiak cabin lodge tent, which is pretty good size, and we bought the vestibule, and we bought a bunch of other things. And we ordered really nice cots from Slumberjack and really nice pads. And so we just built this cabin, essentially, that's a portable cabin we can take up and set up anywhere with a wood stove and all this other stuff. Solar generator to go along with our 4,000-watt gas generator that goes in the receiver hitch of my truck, and all this other stuff. So basically, we can go and set up a camp, much like you would set up an elk camp or deer camp, and have pretty much every amenity we need, including a hot shower, a toilet room or toilet bathroom type shelter, and all these other things. So we have the conveniences of home and, in a great way, the conveniences of an RV with the singular exception of we wouldn't have air conditioning, but we would have everything else. And it's something that we can pack it all up, including the chuck box and the kitchen and the whole thing, and it all fits in the 8-foot bed of my Ford F-350 4x4. And whatever else doesn't fit in there, which is just basically some additional provisions, fuel, food, some additional water, and that kind of stuff, and maybe some tools, chainsaw, and that kind of thing, all goes in my son's truck, which is an F-150 4x4, and off we go. And we basically have two vehicles, both of which are in great shape. We're not hauling anything large, and because we're driving four-wheel drive, we can always get more remote than we could if we were pulling a big fifth wheel or something. So that's our plan for an exit, and then what we've started doing is hunting down locations both in California and outside of California that give us primary, secondary, and tertiary choices depending on where we want to go. That way, if we needed to go, which I don't think we will, if we needed to go, we'd have a way to get out. I urge you to do something like that. Now, we spent a lot of money on it, less than we would spend buying an RV by far, but nevertheless, those kind of tents are not inexpensive. The wood stoves are not inexpensive. We bought a really good stove from Colorado, Cylinder Stoves, and a lot of the stuff that we bought over the last few months, a little bit at a time. But we also armored up. We have body armor for everybody. We have firearms and ammunition. We have all kinds of things, lots of food, lots of water, and so on. So because we had the budget to do it, we went after that. The other thing we've done, too, is we've started to move a lot of our business operations out of California. We can't move ourselves because we're here. This is where our home is, where our church is, where our kids are, where my parents are, and so on. And they're very elderly, so we had to come up with a way for them to get out as well. And that was a bit challenging. We're still working on some details of that, but we couldn't really move ourselves out of California. And besides which, I want to stay here and fight the Second Amendment battle. I really don't want to move for that reason. But we could move some of our business operations out of California in preparation for our exit. Part of that is our business is largely online, not completely, but largely online on demand. So we had to make sure that we had internet access wherever we went, no matter what. Whether the cell network is up or down, whether the hardwired network is up or down, doesn't matter. So we had to work out a cellular secondary system so that we could get on the web to produce videos for you and post this podcast and do the things we need to do for practical defense systems. And then also figure out a satellite-based network so that even if all that went down in part of the country or wherever we are, we could still hit the satellite, still manage our company, and still stay in business as long as somewhere, somehow, internet was still working and we still had customers. So that takes a lot. I mean, it really, really does, particularly when you're trying to figure out how to make a living if you have to bug out. Well, if you haven't already started thinking about that, I urge you to think about it more because the election is coming up in November, and when you read things like the quote I gave you from Andy No, you begin to wonder about it. Now, having said all that, this is my opinion. Andy No had said that if Trump is elected, we're going to see more violence than we've ever seen before, and it's going to be widespread all over the nation. Honestly, I don't think so. And this is just my opinion. And I want to stress, you know what? I'm just a guy like your neighbor, okay? These folks who are on YouTube or like me, you know, I'm a YouTuber and I do a podcast. Okay, well, that doesn't give me any special credibility, okay? I'm just a regular guy. I'm no smarter than you. I don't have any insight that you don't have. I don't have any inside track toward everything. I'm just a guy with an opinion. So don't attach any more to my opinion than you would attach to the guy next door. And I urge you to do that. It doesn't matter which YouTube channel you're watching or how much you like them or how many subscribers they've got or which podcast you're listening to or what TV channel you're talking head you're listening to. None of them know what they're talking about. They're just doing what I'm doing, which is expressing an opinion. And opinions are like noses. Everybody's got one, and some of them smell. So be aware of that. And I'm going to give you my opinion here, but please don't attach too much weight to it because I could be completely wrong. So, all right, now having said that, here is my opinion. My opinion is that if Donald Trump is elected, not long after that's all finalized, and he is elected to a second term, the hammer is going to drop pretty hard on these Antifa rioters. Because at that point, the election's over, and he's not trying to let the Dems look stupid, which they do very well on their own, and he's going to feel empowered to get the National Guard in there and put a stop to it. I'm having trouble envisioning Donald J. Trump allowing Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and their ilk to terrorize cities around this country any more than they already are. And I'm having trouble imagining him tolerating them doing it to the cities they're doing it to currently, considering I believe through the Insurrection Act he has the power, if the state, local, the mayors and the governors either refuse to do it or cannot do it, then at that point, it is my understanding that under the Insurrection Act, the president can call upon the National Guard, federalize them, and take care of the problem. I could be wrong because, again, like I said, I'm just a guy from next door, but that is my opinion. And so, truthfully, I'm not terribly worried about it. As a result, I'm actually more focused on the fact that the blackouts are happening. We have a lot of fires going on in California. We have natural disasters going on. So I like to make sure that we have plenty of water, plenty of food, and a way to generate auxiliary electricity, and because we plan on staying here. We don't plan on packing up and going anywhere. It just shocked me when I realized some of my friends had moved to their second homes, one in Wyoming, one in Montana, and one in Utah. And my wife and I realized, wow, if we had to do that, where would we go? We didn't have a place to go. Well, we couldn't go buy a second home or build one in a fat hurry, and we didn't want to because it didn't work out, and couldn't go down, as it turned out, and buy a new RV. So we did what we could do. I think each of us, regardless of our budget, can do something. And so if you're not already doing that, you should. At the same time, I'm not terribly worried about having to pack up and leave San Diego County, California, because I just don't think it's going to happen. So there you are. But again, don't hold me to that because it's just my opinion. Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm certainly not an analyst who analyzes this stuff. I'm just a blue-collar working stiff with a small company my wife and I own and a guy that's got a YouTube channel, and that's it. So take what I say with a grain of salt because I could be wrong about San Diego County. For all I know, that stuff could show up here, and we would have to go. And so that's one of the reasons why we made some preparations in that regard. And I'm looking at the time, realizing I just ran myself completely out of time on this end of the podcast for this segment. So what I'll do is get into more detail on what we have done and what we're doing, hopefully this week, in the next part of the podcast on Patreon. So if you're on Patreon, stick with me. We'll get into the next part of the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast on your favorite podcast player, then I encourage you to sign up for Patreon if you'd like to do that. And in the meantime, wherever you go, whatever you do, please be safe.
You've been listening to the GunGuy TV podcast.